Can you imagine a world where the simple act of offering a soda could unveil a hidden layer of the past, a secret buried deep within the confines of a prisoner of war camp? It was the 14th of July, 1944. The air hung thick and heavy over Camp Hereford, Texas at 3:17 in the afternoon. The sun beat down mercilessly on the rows of identical barracks, baking the dust into the hard-packed earth. Sergeant Miller wiped the sweat from his brow, the coarse cotton of his uniform sticking uncomfortably to his skin. He surveyed the scene before him, hundreds of German prisoners of war milling about in the compound, their faces a mixture of boredom, resentment, and a guarded curiosity. Camp Hereford, a sprawling complex in the heart of Texas, was home to thousands of captured enemy soldiers. Initially, it housed Italian prisoners, but as the war raged on, the demographics shifted, and now it was predominantly filled with Germans, men plucked from the battlefields of Europe and deposited in this alien landscape. The atmosphere was perpetually tense, a silent battle of wills waged between the guards and the prisoners. The guards, mostly young men fresh out of training or older veterans deemed unfit for combat, tried to maintain order and discipline. The prisoners, a mix of hardened soldiers and reluctant conscripts, chafed under the restrictions and dreamed of home. That afternoon, something was different. A palpable unease seemed to hang in the air. Miller couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt it in the way the prisoners moved, in the furtive glances they exchanged. There was a sense of anticipation, of something brewing beneath the surface. A new shipment of supplies had arrived that morning, and among the crates of canned goods and medical supplies was a generous supply of soda. Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, and much to Miller's surprise, cases of bright orange Fanta. He knew the higher-ups were trying to boost morale, offer the prisoners a taste of American life, maybe even soften their hardened edges. Miller decided to distribute the soda during the afternoon break. He figured a little sugar and fizz might ease the tension. He gestured to a couple of his men to help him unload the cases and set up a makeshift distribution point near the mess hall. As the prisoners lined up, their eyes darted between the guards and the colorful bottles. When Miller held up a bottle of Fanta, a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. He expected them to be pleased, maybe even a little excited. Instead, he was met with a strange mix of amusement and disdain. Fanta. One of the prisoners scoffed, a young man with a neatly trimmed mustache and piercing blue eyes. "What is this imitation?" Miller frowned. "It's soda, Fritz. You ever had it?" The prisoner shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "We have Fanta in Germany. This is not the same." Intrigued, Miller popped the cap off a bottle and offered it to the prisoner. "Try it, see for yourself." The prisoner hesitated for a moment, then took the bottle. He raised it to his lips, took a small sip, and his eyes widened in surprise. He took another longer swig, then lowered the bottle, his expression unreadable. "Well," Miller asked, "what do you think?" The prisoner handed the bottle back to Miller. "It is strange, sweet, too sweet, nothing like the Fanta we know." The reaction was echoed by others in the line. Some wrinkled their noses in disgust, others laughed openly, calling it ersatz and Kunslick, fake and artificial. A few even refused to take it, preferring to stick with water. Miller was baffled. He knew Fanta was a German invention, a product of wartime necessity when Coca-Cola syrup was unavailable. He'd heard stories of how it was made from whatever ingredients were available: apple fiber, whey, beet sugar. He just assumed the American version was a slightly different recipe, but the prisoner's reaction was more than just disappointment. There was something else there, a hint of suspicion. As if the soda itself was some kind of trick. Later that evening, after the prisoners had returned to their barracks and the camp had settled into an uneasy quiet, Miller found himself still thinking about the Fanta incident. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He walked over to the supply depot and rummaged through the empty crates until he found a discarded Fanta bottle. He examined it closely, turning it over in his hands. It looked like any other soda bottle, with the familiar Fanta logo and the name of the American Bottling Company, but something about the label caught his eye. A small, almost imperceptible symbol was printed near the bottom of the label, a symbol he didn't recognize. It looked like a stylized letter or perhaps a rune. He tried to remember if he'd seen it before, but nothing came to mind. He decided to ask around. He showed the bottle to Sergeant Johnson, an older, more experienced guard who'd been stationed at Camp Hereford for years. Johnson squinted at the bottle, then shook his head. "Never seen anything like it, Miller. Probably just some marketing thing." Unsatisfied, Miller went to the camp supply officer, Lieutenant Davis. Davis took one look at the bottle and chuckled. "Fanta, huh? I heard those krauts didn't like it, probably because it reminds them of being on the losing side." Miller pointed to the symbol on the label. "Sir, have you seen this before? Do you know what it means?" Davis examined the symbol with a magnifying glass. "Looks like some kind of company logo. Nothing to worry about, Miller. Just forget about it." But Miller couldn't forget about it. The prisoner's strange reaction, the unfamiliar symbol, it all added up to something he couldn't ignore. He felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that something was amiss at Camp Hereford. Something more than just homesickness and boredom. He decided to dig deeper. He started by questioning the prisoners, trying to glean any information about the Fanta and the symbol, but he was met with a wall of silence. The prisoners clammed up, their faces hardening with suspicion. They refused to answer his questions, offering only shrugs and blank stares. He even tried talking to some of the more cooperative prisoners, men who seemed less ideological and more interested in getting along. But even they were reluctant to talk about the Fanta. They would change the subject or claim they didn't know anything. Miller realized he was up against something bigger than he initially thought. The prisoners were clearly hiding something, and they were doing a good job of it. He needed to find a way to break through their silence to uncover the truth behind the Fanta mystery. He decided to focus on the prisoner who had initially expressed his disdain for the American Fanta, the young man with the mustache and the piercing blue eyes. His name was Private Klaus Richter, and he seemed to be a natural leader among the prisoners. Miller figured if anyone knew what was going on, it was him. Miller started observing Richter closely, watching his every move. He noticed that Richter spent a lot of time talking to other prisoners, often in hushed tones. He also noticed that Richter seemed to have a particular interest in the camp's kitchen. He would often linger near the mess hall, watching the cooks as they prepared the meals. One day, Miller saw Richter slip into the kitchen when no one was looking. He followed him inside, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Richter talking to one of the cooks, a burly man named Schmidt. They were speaking in German, their voices low and urgent. Miller didn't understand German, but he could tell that they were discussing something important. He watched as Richter handed Schmidt a small, folded piece of paper. Schmidt took the paper and quickly hid it in his pocket. Miller knew he had to act fast. He waited until Richter left the kitchen, then he confronted Schmidt. "What was that all about, Schmidt?" he demanded. "What did Richter give you?" Schmidt's eyes widened in panic. He stammered and stuttered, trying to deny that anything had happened. But Miller wasn't buying it. He grabbed Schmidt by the arm and dragged him into a storage room. "I saw you, Schmidt," Miller said, his voice low and menacing. "I saw Richter give you something. Now tell me what it was or you'll be in a lot of trouble." Schmidt finally broke down. He pulled the piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Miller. "It's just a list," he said, his voice trembling. "Richter asked me to get some extra supplies from the kitchen, sugar, flour, things like that." Miller unfolded the paper and examined it closely. It was indeed a list of ingredients: sugar, flour, yeast, and oranges. Oranges? Why would they need oranges? He remembered the prisoners' reaction to the Fanta, their disgust and suspicion. Could it be that they were trying to make their own Fanta? But why? He questioned Schmidt further, but the cook insisted he didn't know anything else. He said Richter had just asked him to get the ingredients and he hadn't asked any questions. Miller was frustrated. He felt like he was getting closer to the truth, but he was still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. He decided to keep a closer watch on Richter and Schmidt, hoping they would lead him to whatever secret they were hiding. Days turned into weeks, and Miller continued his investigation. He spent countless hours observing the prisoners, listening to their conversations, and searching their barracks. He found nothing. The prisoners remained tight-lipped, and there were no further incidents involving the Fanta or the kitchen. Miller began to doubt himself. Maybe he was just imagining things. Maybe the prisoners' reaction to the Fanta was just a matter of taste. Maybe the symbol on the bottle was just a company logo, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. He knew in his gut that the prisoners were hiding something, and he was determined to find out what it was. One cold November evening, as a biting wind swept across the Texas plains, rattling the windows of the barracks, Miller was making his rounds when he noticed something unusual. A faint light was flickering in one of the barracks long after lights out. He crept closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered through a crack in the wooden wall and saw a group of prisoners huddled around a table. They were whispering and gesturing, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of a makeshift lantern. In the center of the table was a map, a detailed map of Camp Hereford with several locations marked with small red circles. Miller's blood ran cold. He recognized the locations: the guard towers, the supply depot, the armory. And one location in particular caught his eye: the camp's water tower. He knew what they were planning. They were planning an escape, a daring, audacious escape that could potentially endanger the entire camp. He had to stop them. He burst through the door, his gun drawn. "Halt." "Outed?" Everyone freeze. The prisoners scrambled to their feet, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. Richter was among them, his eyes blazing with defiance. Miller quickly rounded up the prisoners and confiscated the map. He marched them to the guardhouse where he interrogated them one by one. But they all denied any knowledge of the escape plan. They claimed they were just studying the map for fun, trying to learn more about their surroundings. Miller didn't believe them for a second. He knew they were lying. But he had no proof. He couldn't charge them with anything without hitos enus evidence. He locked them up in the brig, determined to get to the bottom of the conspiracy. He knew the escape attempt was just the tip of the iceberg. He sensed something much bigger, much more dangerous, was brewing beneath the surface of Camp Hereford. As he sat alone in his office, staring at the confiscated map, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small, almost imperceptible symbol was drawn next to the water tower, a symbol identical to the one on the Fanta bottle, the symbol. It was connected to the escape plan and to the Fanta. He finally understood. The Fanta wasn't just a soda, it was a code. A way for the prisoners to communicate with each other, to plan their escape right under the noses of the guards. But who were they communicating with? Who was helping them from the outside? And what was their ultimate goal? The next morning, Miller decided to inspect the water tower. He climbed the rickety ladder to the top, his heart pounding in his chest. He surveyed the surrounding landscape, searching for any sign of outside help, but he saw nothing, just the endless expanse of the Texas plains stretching out to the horizon. He turned his attention to the water tower itself. He examined the steel structure, searching for any signs of tampering. He found nothing. He was about to give up when he noticed something unusual. A small, almost imperceptible hatch was located near the base of the tower, hidden behind a thicket of weeds. He pried open the hatch and peered inside. He saw a narrow, dark tunnel leading down into the earth. A tunnel? What was a tunnel doing under the water tower? He grabbed his flashlight and climbed down into the tunnel. The air was thick and musty, and the darkness was oppressive. He moved slowly, his gun drawn, his senses on high alert. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him deeper and deeper into the earth. He could hear the faint sound of dripping water and the occasional scurrying of rats. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a large underground chamber. Miller shone his flashlight around the chamber, his eyes widening in disbelief. The chamber was filled with equipment, radios, weapons, explosives. And in the center of the chamber, a large table was covered with maps, charts, and documents. Miller recognized some of the documents. They were blueprints of Camp Hereford, detailing the location of every building, every guard post, every underground pipe. He realized then that the escape plan was just a diversion. The prisoners weren't just trying to escape. They were planning something much bigger, much more sinister. They were planning to sabotage the camp, to blow up the water tower, the armory, the supply depot, to cripple Camp Hereford and unleash chaos upon the surrounding community. But why? What was their motive? He scanned the table, searching for any clue that might explain their plan. He found a diary bound in leather, its pages filled with handwritten entries in German. He couldn't read German, but he recognized the name that was written on the cover, Klaus Richter. He opened the diary and began to flip through the pages, searching for anything that might shed light on the mystery. He saw dates, locations, names. He saw references to the FANTA, to the symbol, to the escape plan. He was about to give up when he reached the last page. It was blank except for a single line of text written in English. The eagle has landed. The eagle has landed. What did that mean? Suddenly he heard a noise behind him. He spun around, his gun drawn, and saw a figure standing in the entrance to the chamber. It was Richter. He was holding a gun and his face was set in a grim expression. "It's over, Sergeant Miller," Richter said, his voice cold and menacing. "You know too much." Miller raised his gun, ready to defend himself, but before he could pull the trigger, Richter fired. Miller felt a searing pain in his chest. He staggered back, his vision blurring. He knew he was hit bad. He collapsed to the ground, his body racked with pain. He looked up at Richter, who was standing over him, his gun still smoking. "Any last words, Sergeant?" Richter asked, his voice dripping with contempt. Miller coughed, blood bubbling from his lips. He looked at Richter, his eyes filled with defiance. "You won't get away with this," he gasped. "They'll find out the truth," Richter laughed. "The truth? No one will ever know the truth, Sergeant. This camp will be destroyed and everyone will think it was an accident." He raised his gun again, ready to finish Miller off. But just then, a loud explosion rocked the chamber. The ground shook and the walls began to crumble. Richter was thrown off his feet, his gun flying from his hand. He looked around in panic, his eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" he screamed. Miller knew what was happening. The explosives they had planted were detonating. Their plan was backfiring. The chamber began to collapse around them. Miller closed his eyes, waiting for the end, but then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the explosion stopped. The chamber was still standing, but it was severely damaged. Miller opened his eyes and looked around. Richter was gone. He had escaped in the chaos. Miller struggled to his feet, his body aching. He knew he had to get out of there before the chamber collapsed completely. He stumbled through the tunnel, back towards the water tower. He emerged into the cold night air, gasping for breath. He looked back at the water tower, which was still standing, but it was badly damaged. Smoke was billowing from the top, and the sound of sirens could be heard in the distance. He knew he had to warn the others. He had to tell them about the sabotage plan, about Richter, about everything he had discovered. He started running towards the guardhouse, his body screaming in protest. He had to stop them. He had to save Camp Hereford. He burst into the guardhouse, his face pale and his voice hoarse. "They're planning to destroy the camp," he shouted. "Richter and the others, they have explosives." The guards stared at him in disbelief. They thought he was delirious. "You crazy, Miller," one of them said. "You're wounded. You need to lie down." "I'm not crazy," Miller insisted. "It's true, they're planning to blow up the water tower, the armory, everything." The guards exchanged nervous glances. They knew Miller was a good soldier. He wouldn't make something like this up. They decided to take him seriously. They called the camp commander, Colonel Thompson, and told him everything Miller had said. Thompson was skeptical, but he decided to investigate. He ordered the guards to search the prisoners' barracks, the kitchen, the entire camp. They found nothing. No explosives, no weapons, no evidence of a sabotage plan. Thompson was about to dismiss the whole thing as a wild goose chase when one of the guards found something unusual in the camp's mess hall. Behind a stack of crates of canned peaches, he found a hidden compartment in the wall. And inside the compartment, he found a small, leather-bound diary. Thompson opened the diary and began to read. As he turned the pages, his face grew pale. He realized that Miller had been telling the truth. The prisoners were planning to destroy Camp Hereford. He immediately ordered a lockdown of the camp. He called in reinforcements from a nearby army base. He put the entire camp on high alert. He then turned his attention to the diary. He needed to find out who was behind the sabotage plan and what their ultimate goal was. He flipped through the pages, searching for any clue that might help him. He saw dates, locations, names. He saw references to the FANTA, to the symbol, to the escape plan. He was about to give up when he reached the last page. It was blank except for a single line of text written in English. The eagle has landed. The eagle has landed. He had heard that phrase before. It was a code word used by German spies during the war. He realized then that the prisoners weren't just prisoners of war. They were spies. They were part of a larger network of German agents operating in the United States, and their mission was to sabotage American war efforts to cripple the country from within. He knew he had to act fast. He had to find the other spies before they could carry out their mission. He closed the diary and handed it to one of his officers. "Find out everything you can about this," he said. "I want to know who these spies are, who they're working for, and what they're planning to do." He then turned to Miller, who was lying on a cot in the guardhouse, his face pale and drawn. "You did good, Sergeant," he said. "You saved this camp." Miller managed a weak smile. "Just doing my job, sir." Thompson clapped him on the shoulder. "Get some rest. You've earned it." He then left the guardhouse, his mind racing. He knew that the battle for Camp Hereford was far from over. The spies were still out there and they were still a threat. He walked over to his office and sat down at his desk. He took a deep breath and began to think. He needed a plan. He needed to figure out how to stop the spies before they could destroy Camp Hereford and everything it stood for. He picked up the diary again and began to flip through the pages. He was searching for a pattern, a clue, anything that might help him understand the spies' plan. He stopped at a page that contained a list of names. He recognized some of the names. They were the names of prisoners who had been involved in the escape attempt. But there was one name on the list that he didn't recognize. A woman's name, Nurse Ingrid Schmidt. Nurse Schmidt, she was the camp nurse. She had been working at Camp Hereford for years. She was a trusted member of the community. Could she be one of the spies? It seemed impossible. But Thompson knew that anything was possible in war. He decided to investigate her. He ordered his officers to bring her in for questioning. When Nurse Schmidt arrived at his office, she was calm and composed. She seemed surprised to be summoned, but she didn't appear nervous or suspicious. Thompson began to question her about her background, her work at Camp Hereford, her relationship with the prisoners. She answered his questions honestly and openly. She seemed to have nothing to hide, but Thompson wasn't convinced. He knew that spies were trained to deceive. They were experts at hiding their true identities. He decided to try a different tactic. He showed her the diary and pointed to her name on the list. "Do you recognize this name, Nurse Schmidt?" he asked. She looked at the diary, her face betraying no emotion. "Yes," she said, "that's my name. Can you explain why your name is on this list?" Thompson asked. She shrugged. "I have no idea," she said. "I've never seen this diary before." Thompson stared at her, trying to gauge her reaction. He couldn't tell if she was telling the truth or lying. He decided to press her further. "Do you know anything about a sabotage plan at Camp Hereford, Nurse Schmidt?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," she said, "I don't know anything about that." "Are you sure, Nurse Schmidt?" Thompson asked, his voice hardening. "Because if you're lying to me, you'll be in a lot of trouble." She looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not lying, Colonel," she said. "I swear I don't know anything about a sabotage plan." Thompson was at a loss. He didn't know what to believe. Was Nurse Schmidt a spy, or was she just an innocent victim? He decided to release her, but he ordered his officers to keep a close watch on her. He wasn't ready to rule her out as a suspect. As Nurse Schmidt left his office, Thompson felt a growing sense of unease. He knew that time was running out. The spies were still out there, and they were still planning to destroy Camp Hereford. He needed to find them, and he needed to find them fast. He sat back down at his desk and stared at the diary. He flipped through the pages again, searching for a clue, a pattern, anything that might help him. He stopped at a page that contained a drawing. It was a crude drawing of the camp's water tower, but there was something unusual about the drawing. A small, almost imperceptible symbol was drawn next to the water tower, a symbol identical to the one on the Fanta bottle, the symbol. It was connected to the escape plan, to the Fanta, and now to Nurse Schmidt. He realized then that Nurse Schmidt wasn't just a nurse. She was a messenger. She was using the Fanta and the symbol to communicate with the other spies, but what was the message? What were they planning to do? He looked at the drawing again, his eyes narrowing. He focused on the symbol, trying to decipher its meaning, and then suddenly it hit him. The symbol wasn't just a symbol, it was a map. A map of the camp's underground tunnel system. He knew where the spies were hiding. They were hiding in the tunnels, planning their final attack. He jumped to his feet and ran out of his office. He gathered his officers and ordered them to surround the camp's water tower. "The spies are in the tunnels," he shouted. "We have to stop them before it's too late." The soldiers raced to the water tower, their guns drawn. They surrounded the tower and began to search for the entrance to the tunnel system. They found it hidden behind a thicket of weeds, just as Miller had described. They pried open the hatch and peered inside. The tunnel was dark and narrow, and the air was thick with the stench of mildew. The soldiers hesitated for a moment, unsure of what they would find inside. Thompson stepped forward, his face grim. "Let's go," he said. "We have a job to do." He led the soldiers down into the tunnel, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the fate of Camp Hereford rested on their shoulders. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, they could hear the sound of voices. The spies were nearby. Thompson raised his hand, signaling the soldiers to stop. He listened intently, trying to make out what the spies were saying. He could hear them talking about explosives, about targets, about a final attack. They were getting ready to carry out their plan. Thompson knew that they had to act fast. He gave the signal and the soldiers charged forward, their guns blazing. The tunnel erupted in chaos. Gunfire echoed through the narrow passages and the air filled with smoke and dust. The soldiers fought bravely, but the spies were well prepared. They had set up booby traps and ambushes throughout the tunnel system. One by one, the soldiers fell, wounded or killed. Thompson watched in horror as his men were cut down by the enemy. He knew that they were losing. The spies were too strong, too well organized. He was about to order a retreat when he saw something that made his blood run cold. Nurse Schmidt was standing at the end of the tunnel, holding a detonator in her hand. She was about to blow up the entire tunnel system, burying everyone inside. Thompson knew that he had to stop her. He charged towards her, his gun raised, but it was too late. Nurse Schmidt pressed the detonator. A deafening explosion rocked the tunnel system. The ground shook and the walls began to crumble. Thompson was thrown off his feet, his body battered and bruised. He looked up and saw the tunnel collapsing around him. He knew that he was going to die. But as he closed his eyes, he felt a sense of peace. He had done everything he could to save Camp Hereford. He just hoped that someone would survive to tell the story. Days later, after the dust had settled, the full extent of the damage was revealed. The tunnel system had been completely destroyed and dozens of soldiers and spies had been killed. Camp Hereford was in ruins. The water tower was gone, the armory was destroyed, and many of the buildings had been reduced to rubble. The attack had been a devastating blow to the American war effort. But it had also revealed a shocking truth, that German spies were operating in the United States, and they were willing to do anything to sabotage the country. The authorities launched a massive investigation, searching for the remaining spies and trying to uncover their network. They discovered that the spies had been using the FANTA and the symbol as a code to communicate with each other, and they had been planning to carry out a series of attacks on military installations throughout the country. The investigation led to the arrest of dozens of spies, and their network was eventually dismantled. But the damage had been done. Camp Hereford was never rebuilt, and the memory of the attack remained a dark chapter in American history. As for Nurse Ingrid Schmidt, her body was never found. Some say that she died in the explosion, while others believe that she escaped and fled to Germany. Her true fate remains a mystery to this day. But one thing is certain. The story of Camp Hereford and the FANTA spies serves as a reminder of the dangers of espionage and the importance of vigilance in times of war. Years later, a historian researching the events at Camp Hereford stumbled upon a document hidden deep within the National Archives. It was a transcript of an interrogation of a captured German spy. In the transcript, the spy revealed a shocking secret about Nurse Ingrid Schmidt. He claimed that she wasn't just a spy, she was also a doctor. And she wasn't just helping the prisoners escape, she was helping them with something much worse. He claimed that the prisoners weren't just planning to sabotage the camp. They were planning to unleash a deadly virus on the surrounding population. A virus that could kill thousands of people. The historian was stunned by this revelation. He had always believed that the prisoners were just trying to escape or sabotage the camp. He had never imagined that they were capable of such a horrific act. He decided to investigate further. He searched through medical records, military archives, and old newspapers, looking for any evidence that might support the spy's claim, and then he found it. A small, almost imperceptible note in a medical journal written by Nurse Ingrid Schmidt herself. The note described a new strain of influenza that she had been studying, a strain that was highly contagious and extremely deadly. The note also contained a list of symptoms that matched the symptoms of a mysterious illness that had broken out in the nearby town shortly after the attack on Camp Hereford. The historian realized then that the spy had been telling the truth. Nurse Schmidt and the prisoners had been planning to unleash a deadly virus on the surrounding population. But why? What was their motive? He continued to search through the archives looking for an answer. And then he found it. A letter written by Nurse Schmidt to a high-ranking Nazi official. In the letter, Nurse Schmidt revealed her true identity. She wasn't just a nurse, she was a scientist. And she wasn't just helping the prisoners, she was conducting a secret experiment. She explained that she had been sent to Camp Hereford to study the effects of the virus on the human population. She had been using the prisoners as guinea pigs, and she had been planning to release the virus into the surrounding community to see how it would spread. Her ultimate goal was to develop a biological weapon that could be used to decimate the enemy. The historian was horrified by this revelation. He had uncovered a conspiracy that was far more sinister than he had ever imagined. He knew that he had to tell the world what he had discovered. He had to expose the truth about Nurse Ingrid Schmidt and the deadly virus, but as he prepared to publish his findings, he received a mysterious phone call. A voice on the other end of the line warned him to keep quiet. Some things are better left buried, the voice said. You don't want to stir up trouble. The historian was scared, but he knew that he couldn't back down. He had a responsibility to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. He ignored the warning and published his findings. The story made headlines around the world and the public was outraged. The authorities launched a new investigation, and they eventually uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy. They discovered that Nurse Schmidt had been working with a network of Nazi scientists and spies, and they had been planning to carry out a series of biological attacks throughout the United States. The scientists and spies were eventually brought to justice, but the damage had been done. The story of Camp Hereford and the deadly virus served as a chilling reminder of the horrors of war and the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, a new clue emerged, a final piece of the puzzle that shed light on the true motive behind Nurse Schmidt's horrific plan. A document was discovered in a vault beneath a ruined castle in Bavaria, a document detailing a secret meeting between high-ranking Nazi officials and a representative of a powerful American corporation. The document revealed that the corporation had been funding Nurse Schmidt's research, hoping to profit from the development of a biological weapon. The corporation had been promised exclusive rights to the weapon, and they had been planning to sell it to the highest bidder. The document also revealed that the corporation had been aware of Nurse Schmidt's plan to release the virus on the surrounding population. They had even encouraged her to do so, believing that it would create a demand for their weapon. The historian who discovered the document was shocked by this revelation. He had always believed that the Nazi regime was solely responsible for the horrors of World War II. He had never imagined that an American corporation could be involved in such a heinous act. He knew that he had to expose the truth no matter the cost. He published his findings and the world was once again outraged. The corporation was investigated and its executives were brought to justice. But the damage had been done. The story of Camp Hereford and the deadly virus became a symbol of the greed and corruption that can exist even in the most powerful institutions. And so the story of Camp Hereford remains a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dark side of humanity and the importance of holding those in power accountable for their actions. But there is one final twist to the story, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Shortly before the attack on Camp Hereford, a shipment of FANTA was sent to the camp, a shipment that never arrived. The truck carrying the FANTA disappeared without a trace and its driver was never found. Some say that the truck was hijacked by German spies, who used the FANTA to communicate with their agents inside the camp. Others say that the truck was stolen by a rival corporation, who wanted to prevent the biological weapon from being developed. But the truth is, no one knows what happened to the missing FANTA. Its disappearance remains one of the great mysteries of World War II, and so, the story of Camp Hereford continues to fascinate and intrigue us, reminding us that even in the midst of war, there are secrets that remain hidden waiting to be uncovered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the now silent fields of Camp Hereford, the final secret remained buried, a silent testament to the horrors of war and the enduring power of human darkness. The historian, exhausted but resolute, closed his notebook, the image of the FANTA bottle, that seemingly innocuous symbol of wartime ingenuity, forever etched in his mind as a harbinger of unimaginable evil. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the most intriguing stories from World War II. Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War II. But one question still lingers in the air. What was the significance of the orange groves outside the camp that no one ever mentioned? And why were the prisoners so interested in them? Content as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the now silent fields of Camp Hereford, the final secret remained buried, a silent testament to the horrors of war and the enduring power of human darkness. The historian, exhausted but resolute, closed his notebook, the image of the FANTA bottle, that seemingly innocuous symbol of wartime ingenuity, forever etched in his mind as a harbinger of unimaginable evil. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the most intriguing stories from World War II. Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War II. But one question still lingers in the air. What was the significance of the orange groves outside the camp that no one ever mentioned, and why were the prisoners so interested in them? Can you imagine a world where the simple act of offering a soda could unveil a hidden layer of the past, a secret buried deep within the confines of a prisoner of war camp? This is the story we will unveil today. Camp Hereford, Texas, 1944. A desolate landscape punctuated by rows of identical barracks, each housing the ghosts of captured German soldiers. Sergeant Miller, a man weathered by years of service, patrolled the perimeter, his gaze sweeping over the barbed wire fences and the stoic faces of the prisoners. He had seen it all: the bravado, the despair, the quiet simmering resentment. But something was different now, a palpable tension thicker than the humid Texas air. It was more than just the usual longing for home. It was a collective anticipation, a secret brewing beneath the surface. Among the thousands of captured men, one figure stood out: Klaus Richter, young, charismatic, with eyes that held a chilling intelligence. Richter was a natural leader, a spark that ignited the smoldering embers of discontent within the camp. He moved with a quiet confidence, his words carrying weight among his fellow prisoners. What made him so different? What fueled his quiet rebellion? Camp life was a monotonous cycle of meager rations, forced labor, and the constant surveillance of the guards. The prisoners, a motley crew of soldiers plucked from the battlefields of Europe, were united by their shared captivity but divided by their individual hopes and fears. They yearned for news from home, for an end to the war, for a chance to reclaim their lives. That afternoon, a new shipment of supplies arrived. Amidst the usual crates of canned goods and medical supplies, a peculiar addition caused a stir: cases of bright orange Fanta soda. Sergeant Miller, hoping to ease the tension, decided to distribute the drinks during the afternoon break, but instead of gratitude, he was met with suspicion and disdain, particularly from Richter. "Fanta?" Richter scoffed, his voice laced with amusement. "This is not the Fanta we know." Intrigued, Miller offered him a bottle. Richter hesitated, then took a sip, his expression shifting from disdain to surprise. "It is strange," he conceded, "too sweet, nothing like the Fanta we have in Germany." The other prisoners echoed his sentiment, their reactions ranging from disgust to outright rejection. Miller was perplexed. He knew Fanta was a German invention born out of wartime necessity, but why this reaction? Was it merely a matter of taste, or was there something more to it? Later that evening, Miller couldn't shake off the encounter. He found an empty Fanta bottle and noticed a peculiar symbol printed near the bottom of the label, a stylized rune he had never seen before. He asked around, but no one seemed to know anything about it. The supply officer dismissed it as a company logo, but Miller's gut told him otherwise. He felt an unsettling premonition, a sense that something was amiss at Camp Hereford. Determined to uncover the truth, Miller began his own investigation. He started by observing Richter, noticing his frequent hushed conversations with other prisoners and his peculiar interest in the camp's kitchen. One day, Miller saw Richter slip into the kitchen when no one was looking. He followed him and witnessed Richter handing a small, folded piece of paper to the cook, a burly man named Schmidt. Miller confronted Schmidt, who reluctantly revealed that Richter had asked him to gather extra ingredients: sugar, flour, yeast, and oranges. Oranges? Why would they need oranges? Miller's mind raced, connecting the dots. The prisoner's reaction to the Fanta, the symbol, the kitchen rendezvous, the list of ingredients. Could they be trying to recreate the German Fanta? But why? What was the purpose of this clandestine culinary project? Days turned into weeks, and Miller continued his surveillance, growing increasingly frustrated by the prisoners' tight-lipped behavior. It was as if they were protecting a secret that Miller was determined to expose. One cold November evening, Miller noticed a faint light flickering in one of the barracks after lights out. He crept closer and peered through a crack in the wall, his heart pounding. He saw a group of prisoners huddled around a table, a map spread before them. It was a detailed map of Camp Hereford with several locations marked in red: the guard towers, the supply depot, the armory, and the water tower. They were planning an escape, a daring, audacious plan that could endanger the entire camp. Bursting into the barracks, Miller apprehended the prisoners and confiscated the map, but they denied any knowledge of the escape plan, claiming they were merely studying their surroundings. Miller didn't believe them. Locking them up, he examined the map more closely and noticed the symbol from the Fanta bottle etched beside the water tower. The Fanta, the symbol, the escape plan, it was all connected. The Fanta was a code, a way for the prisoners to communicate and coordinate their actions. But who were they communicating with? Who was helping them from the outside? Driven by a growing sense of urgency, Miller inspected the water tower, discovering a hidden hatch leading to a dark, underground tunnel. Armed with his flashlight, he ventured into the tunnel, his senses on high alert. The tunnel led to a large, underground chamber filled with radios, weapons, explosives, and detailed blueprints of Camp Hereford. The escape plan was a smokescreen. The prisoners weren't just trying to escape. They were planning to sabotage the camp, to blow up the water tower, the armory, and the supply depot. But why? What was their motive? As Miller searched for answers, he found a diary with Richter's name on the cover. Flipping through the pages, he found references to the Fanta, the symbol, the escape plan, and a single line written in English: "The eagle has landed." Suddenly, Richter appeared, gun in hand, his eyes filled with cold determination. "It's over, Sergeant Miller," he said. "You know too much." Camp Hereford, once a desolate landscape of prisoner confinement, had become a tinderbox of secrets and simmering rebellion. Sergeant Miller, driven by a relentless pursuit of the truth, found himself caught in a web of deception that threatened to engulf the entire camp. The discovery of the tunnel beneath the water tower had confirmed his worst fears. The prisoners were not simply plotting an escape. They were planning a coordinated act of sabotage, a strike against the heart of the American war effort. But the revelation that the Fanta soda and its cryptic symbol were at the heart of this conspiracy deepened the mystery, raising more questions than answers. Why this particular soda? What was the significance of the symbol? And who was the elusive eagle that Richter had mentioned in his diary? These questions gnawed at Miller as he raced against time to unravel the conspiracy before it was too late. The prisoners, a diverse group of men united by their shared predicament, had transformed into a clandestine network, communicating through coded messages and clandestine meetings. Their quiet resentment had morphed into a dangerous resolve, fueled by a secret purpose that threatened to shatter the fragile peace of Camp Hereford. And at the center of it all was Klaus Richter, the charismatic young prisoner whose piercing blue eyes held the key to unlocking the truth. But Richter was a formidable adversary, a cunning and resourceful leader who seemed to anticipate Miller's every move. He had managed to maintain a veil of secrecy around his activities, skillfully concealing his true intentions from the prying eyes of the guards. As Miller delved deeper into the investigation, he encountered a wall of silence, a collective refusal from the prisoners to divulge any information. They closed ranks, protecting their secret with unwavering loyalty, making it increasingly difficult for Miller to piece together the puzzle. The atmosphere within the camp grew increasingly tense, the air thick with suspicion and distrust. Miller found himself questioning everyone, even those he had previously considered allies. He was haunted by the fear that he was missing something crucial, that the true nature of the conspiracy was far more complex and dangerous than he could have imagined. Amidst the chaos and uncertainty, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman whose presence added another layer of intrigue to the unfolding drama, Nurse Ingrid Schmidt. A seemingly compassionate and dedicated medical professional, Nurse Schmidt had earned the trust of both the guards and the prisoners. But Miller couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, that her gentle demeanor concealed a darker purpose. He observed her interactions with the prisoners, noticing the subtle gestures, the fleeting glances, the hushed conversations that seemed to convey more than met the eye. Was she a pawn in Richter's game, or was she a key player in the conspiracy? Miller couldn't be sure, but he knew that he had to uncover her true allegiance if he wanted to stop the impending disaster. As he investigated Nurse Schmidt, he discovered a series of inconsistencies in her background, gaps in her story that raised red flags. He learned that she had arrived at Camp Hereford shortly before the new shipment of FANTA, and that she had taken a particular interest in the prisoners who were involved in the kitchen incident. He also found evidence that she had been communicating with someone outside the camp, using a hidden radio transmitter disguised as a medical device. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but Miller still lacked the crucial piece of evidence that would expose the full scope of the conspiracy. He knew that time was running out, and that he had to act quickly if he wanted to save Camp Hereford from destruction. One cold, rainy night, Miller received a tip from a disgruntled prisoner, a man who had grown disillusioned with Richter's leadership and feared the consequences of the sabotage plan. The prisoner revealed that Richter and his followers were planning to meet in the camp's abandoned chapel, where they would finalize the details of their attack. Miller saw this as his chance to finally expose the conspiracy and bring Richter to justice. He gathered a team of trusted guards and surrounded the chapel, preparing to raid the meeting and apprehend the prisoners. As he waited for the signal to storm the building, Miller couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. He knew that Richter was too smart to be caught so easily and that something wasn't adding up, but he had come too far to turn back now. He gave the signal and the guards stormed the chapel, their guns drawn, but as they burst through the doors they found the chapel empty. The prisoners were gone. Miller realized that he had been outsmarted. Richter had anticipated his move and had led his followers to a different location, leaving Miller and his men chasing shadows. Frustrated and defeated, Miller returned to his office, convinced that he had failed. He had allowed Richter to slip through his fingers, and now the sabotage plan was closer to becoming a reality. As he sat alone in his office, staring at the confiscated map and the empty Fanta bottle, Miller felt a deep sense of despair. He was convinced that something terrible was about to happen, but he had no proof, no leads, and no one to believe him. The truth was out there, hidden beneath layers of deception and conspiracy, but he was running out of time to uncover it. Little did he know, the truth was closer than he thought, lurking in the shadows of Camp Hereford, waiting to be revealed. And when it finally emerged, it would be more shocking and devastating than he could have ever imagined. Driven by a desperate need to salvage the situation, Miller reviewed every piece of evidence he had collected, searching for a missed clue, a hidden connection that could lead him to Richter and his saboteurs. He scrutinized the map, the diary, the Fanta bottle, and the notes he had taken during his interviews with the prisoners. He focused on the symbol from the Fanta bottle, the stylized rune that had become the key to unlocking the mystery. He had consulted with experts, but no one had been able to identify the symbol or its origin. It was as if it had been created specifically for this purpose, a secret code designed to conceal a hidden message. As he stared at the symbol, Miller noticed something he had overlooked before, a series of tiny dots surrounding the rune, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. He realized that these dots were arranged in a specific pattern, a pattern that resembled a series of coordinates. He grabbed a map of the surrounding area and began to plot the coordinates, his heart pounding with anticipation. The coordinates led him to a remote location several miles outside of Camp Hereford, a place marked on the map as the old Henderson Farm. The Henderson Farm had been abandoned for years, its buildings dilapidated and overgrown with weeds. It was a desolate and isolated place, the perfect location for a clandestine meeting or a hidden base of operations. Miller knew that he had to investigate the farm, even though it was a long shot. He gathered a team of guards and set off into the night, determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. As they approached the farm, Miller could feel the tension in the air. The silence was broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows of the farmhouse. He ordered his men to surround the property, and they cautiously approached the main building, their guns drawn. As they entered the farmhouse, Miller was struck by the eerie silence. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The furniture was covered in cobwebs and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet. It was as if time had stood still in this place, preserving the memories of a bygone era. Miller led his men through the house, searching for any sign of Richter or his followers. They found nothing. The farmhouse was empty, except for a few stray animals that had taken refuge inside. Just when Miller was about to give up, one of his men discovered a hidden cellar beneath the kitchen. They cautiously descended the stairs, their flashlights illuminating the darkness below. The cellar was damp and musty, and the air was heavy with the smell of earth and mold. In the center of the cellar, they found a large wooden crate covered with a tarp. Miller approached the crate and pulled back the tarp, revealing its contents. Inside the crate were dozens of orange crates stacked neatly on top of each other. He saw some tools, and an assortment of shovels and pickaxes were piled beside the crates. Miller reached into one of the crates and pulled out an orange, examining it closely. It looked like any other orange, but something felt different about it. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible mark on the peel, a mark that resembled the symbol from the Fanta bottle. The oranges weren't just oranges, they were part of the code. He ordered his men to open the crates, and they began to unload the fruit, their faces growing increasingly grim. As they emptied the crates, they discovered that each orange was hollowed out and filled with something: maps, documents, radio parts, and vials of a strange amber-colored liquid. Miller recognized the liquid. It was the same substance that Nurse Schmidt had been studying in her laboratory, the substance that he suspected was a deadly virus. The escape plan, the sabotage, the Fanta code. It all led to this. Richter and his followers weren't just planning to destroy Camp Hereford, they were planning to unleash a biological weapon, a weapon that could kill thousands of people. The Henderson farm wasn't just a meeting place, it was a laboratory, a storage facility, and a staging ground for a devastating attack. As Miller stood there, surrounded by the evidence of Richter's horrific plan, he realized that he had underestimated the enemy. He had focused on the escape and the sabotage, but he had failed to see the true danger, the weaponization of disease. The clock was ticking, the virus was ready to be unleashed, and Miller was the only one who could stop it. But as he turned to leave the cellar, he heard a noise above him. A trapdoor slammed shut, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the farmhouse. Miller and his men were trapped, they were surrounded, and Richter was waiting for them, ready to finish what he had started. In the dim light of the cellar, Miller saw a note placed on top of the crates. Scrawled in crude lettering were two words: "The Orchard." Miller's blood ran cold. The Orchard. What did it mean? Just then, the cellar door burst open and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Nurse Schmidt. She was holding a gun and her face was set in a grim expression. "It's over, Sergeant Miller," she said, her voice cold and menacing. "You can't stop us now." Miller's heart sank. Nurse Schmidt was one of them. She had been working with Richter all along, helping him to develop and deploy the virus. He had trusted her, confided in her, and she had betrayed him. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something else, a flicker of doubt, a hint of remorse. Was it possible that she still had a conscience? Was there a way to reach her, to convince her to stop this madness? Miller knew that he had to try, even if it meant risking his own life. "Ingrid," he said, his voice pleading, "what are you doing? This isn't you. You're a nurse, a healer, you can't do this." Nurse Schmidt hesitated, her hand trembling slightly. "I have no choice," she said. "I'm doing what I have to do." "No, you don't," Miller replied. "There's always a choice. You can still walk away from this. You can still save yourself." Nurse Schmidt stared at him, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. For a moment, Miller thought he had gotten through to her, but then Richter appeared behind her, his face contorted with rage. "Don't listen to him, Ingrid," he shouted. "He's trying to trick you. We have to finish this. We have to unleash the virus." Nurse Schmidt's expression hardened. She raised her gun and pointed it at Miller. "I'm sorry, Sergeant," she said, "but it's too late." Just as she was about to pull the trigger, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Drop the gun, Nurse Schmidt." The voice belonged to Sergeant Johnson, one of Miller's trusted men. He had managed to sneak around the farmhouse and had caught Nurse Schmidt by surprise. Nurse Schmidt turned towards Johnson, her eyes widening in alarm. Miller saw his chance. He lunged at Richter, tackling him to the ground. A fierce struggle ensued, the two men grappling for control of Richter's gun. As they wrestled, Miller saw something that made his blood run cold. Richter was holding a small glass vial filled with the amber-colored liquid. He was about to smash the vial, releasing the virus into the air. Miller knew that he had to stop him, even if it meant sacrificing himself. With a surge of adrenaline, he managed to wrest the gun from Richter's grasp. He pointed the gun at Richter's head, his finger on the trigger. "Don't do it, Richter," he said, his voice trembling. "It's over, you've lost." Richter stared at him, his eyes filled with hatred and defiance. "You can't stop me, Miller," he shouted. "The virus will be released, it's already too late." Miller hesitated. He knew that Richter was bluffing, but he couldn't be sure. He couldn't risk releasing the virus, even if it meant letting Richter escape. He lowered the gun, his heart heavy with despair. But just as he was about to release Richter, Nurse Schmidt made a move that shocked everyone. She turned her gun on Richter and fired. Richter slumped to the ground dead. Nurse Schmidt dropped the gun and stared at Richter's body, her face a mask of horror. "What have I done?" she whispered. Miller stared at her in disbelief. He couldn't understand why she had killed Richter. Was she trying to redeem herself? Or was there another reason? As the sirens wailed in the distance approaching Camp Hereford, Miller struggled to make sense of the chaotic events that had unfolded. Nurse Schmidt's shocking betrayal, the discovery of the deadly virus, Richter's twisted plan, and now her sudden act of violence. The Orchard. The two words swam in his mind, a final cryptic clue to the puzzle. He looked at Nurse Schmidt, her face etched with remorse and exhaustion. "The Orchard," he said, his voice barely a whisper. What does it mean? Nurse Schmidt looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. It's the source, she said, the origin of the virus. Miller's blood ran cold. The source, what was she talking about? The oranges, she continued. They weren't just a way to transport the virus. They were the key to creating it. She explained that the oranges from the old Henderson farm weren't ordinary oranges. They were a special breed, cultivated by a German scientist before the war. These oranges contained a unique enzyme that, when combined with a specific strain of influenza, could create a highly contagious and deadly virus. Richter had been sent to Camp Hereford to retrieve these oranges and use them to create the virus, which he planned to release on the surrounding population. The FANTA was used as a disguise, a way to transport the oranges and the other necessary ingredients into the camp without arousing suspicion. The symbol on the bottle was a map, leading the prisoners to the Henderson farm and the secret orchard. But why? Why would they want to unleash such a horrific weapon on innocent people? Nurse Schmidt revealed that Richter was a true believer in the Nazi ideology. He believed that the war was a struggle for survival and that any means were justified to achieve victory. He saw the virus as a way to weaken the enemy, to cripple their economy and their morale. Nurse Schmidt had initially been drawn to Richter's charisma and his vision of a better world, but as she learned more about his plan, she began to have doubts. She couldn't reconcile her medical oath with the idea of unleashing a deadly virus on innocent people. She had tried to convince Richter to abandon the plan, but he had refused. He was too far gone, too consumed by his ideology. Finally, she had realized that the only way to stop him was to kill him. Miller stared at her, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe that such a horrific plan had been hatched right under his nose. He had been so focused on the escape and the sabotage that he had missed the true danger, the biological weapon. The sirens grew louder and the first guards arrived at the farmhouse. They apprehended Nurse Schmidt and the remaining prisoners, securing the scene and containing the virus. As Miller watched them lead Nurse Schmidt away, he felt a sense of profound sadness. She had made a terrible mistake, but she had also shown courage and remorse. He wondered what would happen to her, whether she would be punished or redeemed. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape, Miller looked towards the Henderson farm, towards the secret orchard that had been the source of so much evil. He knew that the war was far from over and that there would be more secrets to uncover, more dangers to face. But he also knew that he had done his duty, that he had saved Camp Hereford and the surrounding community from a devastating attack. But one final question still lingered in his mind. What was the significance of the orange groves outside the camp that no one ever mentioned, and why were the prisoners so interested in them? The question would haunt him for years to come, a reminder of the dark secrets that lie hidden beneath the surface of war. The events at the Henderson farm cast a long shadow over Camp Hereford. The discovery of the virus and the exposure of the Nazi plot sent shockwaves through the military and the government. A massive investigation was launched, targeting any individuals or organizations that might have been involved in the conspiracy. Nurse Schmidt was taken into custody and interrogated for days, revealing the full extent of Richter's plan and the network of spies and scientists who had supported him. She provided valuable information that helped to dismantle the Nazi operation and prevent further attacks. But as the investigation progressed, a new mystery emerged: the origin of the oranges. The German scientist who had created the special breed had disappeared without a trace before the war, and his research had been lost. No one knew how Richter had obtained the oranges or where the secret orchard was located. The authorities launched a search for the orchard, hoping to destroy the remaining oranges and prevent anyone else from using them to create the virus. They searched the surrounding area, but they found nothing. The orchard seemed to have vanished, as if it had never existed. As the weeks turned into months, the investigation began to lose momentum. The authorities were unable to find the orchard, and the trail of evidence grew cold. The case was eventually closed, and the events at Camp Hereford faded into the background of the war. But Sergeant Miller could never forget what had happened. He was haunted by the memory of Richter, of Nurse Schmidt, and of the deadly virus that had almost been unleashed. He continued to search for answers even after the war had ended. He traveled to Germany, hoping to find clues about the scientist who had created the oranges. He interviewed former Nazi officials, hoping to learn more about Richter's plan, but he found nothing. The mystery of the oranges remained unsolved. One day, years after the war, Miller received a letter from an old friend who had served with him at Camp Hereford. The friend had been researching the history of the camp, and he had stumbled upon a strange document in the National Archives. The document was a land survey,